no knees over your toes thing, not necessarily true at all, okay? And you should reach about 15, 20 degrees of dorsiflexion, okay, here. I mean, your foot should end up in about that position, okay? Now, if my soleus and gastroc are tight, well, they're not going to allow that to happen, are they? Right?
Right.
Right. So the tibia will remain more upright here, so that the angle of the body is forward, the angle of the tibia is relatively vertical. Now from this point, we start thinking pairings, right? Wheels start turning. So oftentimes you might see an excessive forward lean paired with what? Toes out, right? Because if the gastroc is tight, gastroc and soleus are tight, they create one issue, they very well could create another, right? And we start seeing some of that overlap, which allows us to start narrowing down which muscles are actually the issue, right? We start tracing to the root. Cool. Very nice. So there's your overactive gland. So now with that in mind, what would be my underactive stuff? What would be my underactive stuff? Well, let's see. If my hip flexors are overactive and tight, that would mean my what would be weak? Hip extensor. What's my main hip extensor? Glute max. Right? Again, if my hip flexors are pulling me forward, it means the gluteus maximus isn't resisting to keep me more upright, right? If the hip extensors are tight, or if the hip flexors are tight, extensors are weak. Okay, so think about it this way. Abdominal complex is overactive. What's underactive? Postural spinal erectors, right? The erector spinae. Took my night class like 10 minutes to get erector spinae, I swear to God. Okay. Gastroc and soleus are overactive. Primary function of the gastroc and the soleus is plantar flexion, right? So what would then be underactive? What is my major dorsiflexor?
Anterior tibialis.
Very good. Tibialis anterior. Awesome. Tibialis anterior. So what would I do? I would have my client roll the hip flexors. Right up in that pocket line, right? Right down the middle of the thigh. I would have my client, and again, hip flexors, remember, hip flexors could also include TFL. When in doubt, blame the TFL. It pops up all over the place. It's an internal rotator, it's a hip flexor. So you have your client roll the hip flexors. You have your client roll out the calves, right? Stretch the calves, stretch the hip flexors. You do, for hip flexor stretch, like an active isolated press. So you get down in that good lunge position here. Dorsiflex feet, press the hips forward, release. Press the hips forward, release. Nobody ever stretches their hip flexors. Hip flexors are very commonly tight. Don't have your client roll your abs. That's just, again, that's weird. Ask a massage therapist what abdominal massage does. Or worse. And we strengthen, again, strengthen glute max. Strengthen our posturals. Bird dogs.
Bird dogs.
Bird dogs. Swimmers. Supermans. Right? Things that extend the spine. Strengthen the glute max. Back extensions. Fact of the matter is when you get on a back extension machine and you do our traditional back extensions, the amount of spinal extension that you get is relatively minimal. It's actually static. The spine actually doesn't move. Back extension machine is actually more of a hip extension. Glutes, hamstrings, a lot more of that stuff than it is in the back, to be honest with you. Okay, unless you roll the back forward, etc. But I digress. Okay. So questions.
This is all for the overactive muscle, right?
Over or under.
The
Depends on what you're
exercises
talking
we're
about.
going to be doing right now.
Right. Right now. Oops. Something else that you can see in the LPHC is that the low back will arch. The low back will arch. Okay, so now, again, instead of being here, parallel, parallel, we end up more here. Okay? I don't like to do this one, but I look back into this one. Okay? Pelvis anteriorly rotated. Back in a super hyperextended position. Okay? So, reasoning. Your body knows that as I squat down, I have to maintain my center of gravity over my feet, right? What happens if my center goes forward to my feet? I'm going to fall forward. True?
True.
True. So I've got muscles that aren't working right to keep me here. So what my body has to do is it has to pull those shoulders back over my feet. And it does so the only way that it can. It pulls the back this way. All right? So now in a case like this, first thing we go to is what's going to be tight here. So if I've got an arched back, what musculature is going to be tight immediately? The erector spinae. So here the erectors would go from over or underactive to overactive, right? Mm-hmm. This would be a very overactive muscle in this case. Lat. Lats would be overactive in this case. People forget, people think about lats with like lat pull down and pull-ups and rowing and stuff like that. Your lats originate where? Bottom half of your spine, T6 down to your sacrum. It's basically from the bottom point of your shoulder blade down to your sacrum. Your lats run right down that line. And if those lats are tight, they're going to pull that spine out of whack. Your lats are absolutely part of your postural chain. They're the most superficial layer of your postural chain. Lower postural chain. And the reason that we're in this position in the first place is overactive hip flexors. Right? Those hip flexors are pulling the body forward, so that it's got to make that compensation. Okay? All right? So where would my underactive musculature go? Huh? A little bit deeper than that, I would go to underactive here. Core stabilizers.
Core stabilizer.
We talked about this earlier in the week, Tuesday. You have that local stabilization system. Remember, so here the pelvis is anteriorly rotated. So those muscles that are supposed to keep the pelvis stable are not functioning properly. Okay, so that local and some of the global stabilization system. Glute, hamstring, your hip extensors. Because remember, it's the hip extensors that are supposed to fight the hip flexors. So if the hip extensors aren't working right, the hip extensors are underactive. So again, so we'd roll the lat. Remember, we roll the lat to the side, right? We don't generally foam roll the erectors. Why not? Remember, especially the upper lower back.
Right.
Yeah. The curvature's already there, right? In my cervical and lumbar spine are already lordotically curved. If I lay them over a foam roller, what's it going to do? It's going to exaggerate that curve, right? Technically, you can roll the thoracic if you want to. You're probably not going to get a lot of adhesions out, but you might get a little pop-pop. I feel good. We're going to roll the hip flexors again. We're going to strengthen those core stabilizers, drawing in, bracing, right? Prone iso ab. Contract the glutes, contract the hamstrings. We'll have, people got underactiveness here. You hit a plank, these things are going to start to shake. Quake, because it's weak. It's not wanting to work the right way, right?
Right.
Cool. Questions? So that's what we look at on the bottom in that lateral view. Now the other thing we can look at in the lateral view is the shoulder. Shoulder slash head. You know what we'll see there is that the arms fall forward. So now as I squat, my arms pull away from the side of my ears and they fall forward. Here. Okay? They're not able to maintain elbows to ears. So here what I'm thinking of is over. So if I've got muscles that are pulling me from here to here, right? What is this joint movement?
Shoulder something.
Shoulder extension. Very good. Shoulder extension. Okay, so that means my shoulder extensors are going to be tight. So what are some of my primary shoulder extensors? Say again?
Pec major minor.
Okay. Hold that thought. And we'll come back around to those for sure, because you're right. What's my major shoulder extensor? Biggest one. Lat. Okay, tight lat. And right underneath the lat's a little helper.
Terry's major.
Close. Terry's
major.
Major. Terry's major. Terry's major. It is going to be that one. And then AJ actually brings up a point. We'll actually have overactive pec major, pec minor. There's one thing we have to remember is that from a fully flexed position, from a full overhead down to 90 degrees, the lower part of pec major is a shoulder extensor. So we do things like dumbbell pullovers. Pec major plays a role in shoulder extension, and a fair one at that. So pec major's tight, it'll pull that arm back down. And as we pull the arm down, pec minor pulls the shoulder blade with it. Protraction, downward rotation. Okay? Here. Now, on the underactive side, primarily there's going to be instability and weakness in the rotator cuff complex. Supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis. Really, what you're looking at there is muscles that aren't allowing that arm to stay in an upward position. And then the mid and lower traps and the rhomboids.
I love the rhomboids.
I do too.
Bam!
The mid-traps and rhomboids are muscles that are supposed to keep the scapula retracted. So if the arm is pulling forward into a protraction, it means that the retractors are not doing the job of keeping the scapula back. Okay? So here we roll. We roll the lats. Can't really roll pec major. It doesn't work quite as well. Unless you have the roller stick. Use PVC pipe. You could do that. We'd strengthen the rotator stuff. Things like scaptions, abductions, isometric stuff, rotation, scarecrow stuff. And a lot of them here, retraction movements. It's a lot of pulling and depression movements. Okay, things like dips, stuff like that. All right. Questions?
So to be likely to see low back arches and your arms fall forward because lats are a big part of that?
Yes.
Together? Exactly.
So now, Kristen brings up to us, so would it be common to see maybe a low back arch and the arms fall forward? Sure. Because again, the lats play a role in compensation for both of those deficits. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. Now, the third view that we look at is posterior, and I'm not going to dive hugely into the posterior stuff because again, it's a little bit deeper than we need for now. But what we see in the posterior view we can confirm the toe thing. Confirm the toes. Okay? B, from the back, from the posterior, we can see an ankle eversion. You guys remember what eversion is? Side squat here. Which way would my feet go?
Out.
Soles of the feet go out. So what happened? It looked like the feet were collapsing. Eversion, often accompanied with knees in. Not always, but often. And we can see what's called an asymmetrical weight shift. An asymmetrical weight shift. Okay, remember, when I squat, I'm supposed to keep my weight evenly distributed, right and left, right? What if I shift my weight over to one side, right? So what we'd see there is we'd see overactive adduction on the drive leg, abduction on the trail leg, on the weak leg, and vice versa. Underactive abduction, underactive adduction here, that's forcing you to kind of shift one way or the other. Okay? Questions? Just guys take a breather, we'll come back and we'll see some.